Why in general is silence important? Why do we want to experience that silence? Why resides God in silence? Everything is held together by silence. So silence is the framework in which everything else is embedded. There is not an indefinite amount of amplitude, so intensity of energy, but there is an indefinite amount of silence. So there is an indefinite amount of going into absolute nothingness, and that nothingness holds everything together. It's the framework in which everything exists. Why do you have actually a sensual impression? Why do you see anything? Why do you hear anything? The answer is very simple. One could say, well, because you don't hear anything else. For example, when you are very upset or you're very afraid, and then something happens that upsets you a lot, you're not afraid anymore, you're very upset. If then you're very, very much in love one day, very much in love, and somebody does something very upsetting, eventually you're not so upset because you're so much in love. If you're trying to read a book and you're very well concentrated, and there is a fly around you that sits on your face, you cannot read the book. You will look at the fly. Any sensual impression only exists in absence of another. Somehow, even for your brain, there is no difference between an imagination and an actual impression. This is why if you imagine things long enough, you may think that you have actually seen them, even if you have just imagined them. Because somehow your brain cannot distinguish between a really good imagination and a really good actual impression. Why can you distinguish between imaginations and actual sensual impressions in the first place? You can distinguish because the sensual impression is more loud than the imagination. It is the amplitude of noise, basically, that the sensual impression makes in your brain that makes it more prevalent. So what we learn from this is the following. Every impression of what is suppresses every other impression of what is in the amount of it, the amplitude that it has, so the intensity of the sensual impression. The stronger impression suppresses the weaker impression, and the weaker impression that is still stronger than a much weaker impression suppresses the even weaker impression. This is something very interesting. It's so interesting you can't even imagine. Why is it so interesting? It's interesting because it means that there are many things that you're perceiving right now of which you are not aware you're perceiving them because they're too silent. What are those things which are so silent? They're just not as brutal as your visual impression of this light bulb here above me. This light bulb is very intense. You look at it and your eyes do and you feel that light and it's like boom, and all your consciousness is completely busy with the light bulb. But there are other things at the same time also here which are not so busy. So when we now think about, by the way, what is death? This is that what I've said before. Death is the absence of any sensual impression. What does that mean? It means it's the absence of everything that's loud. What does that mean? It means, according to that theory, it's the presence of everything that's ultimately silent. In other words, you're dead right now. It's only you can't hear it, and you can't see it, and you can't taste it, and you can't smell it, because you're so busy with the sensual impressions of your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your nose, and your skin, and everything else, and even your thoughts, because your thoughts, they're so loud that you basically cannot feel that thing that you are right now, and that you have always been, and that you will always be, and that is always here. You can't feel it. You can't sense it. And that's why silence is important. Silence is important so that you can hear that voice that is silent. And that you can enter that state that is infinitely silent. Because that state that is infinitely silent has always been there even before you were born. And that state will always be there even when you're not here. Because that state is the all-pervasive state of pure being, in which everything else is embedded, and that's why you should be silent.